Hi everybody and welcome to Crop and Crate Delivered. My name is Nicole Nowosad. I'm one of the instructors for this weekend. I really can't wait to get things started and get things kicked off. It's going to be a weekend full of fun and packed information for you. We have some fantastic classes with some fantastic friends of mine. We have some great special speakers and guests, and there's lots of going to be, I'm sure, some prizes along the way. So I'm really excited to be part of this. I've been teaching with Crop and Create events for probably the last 4 or 5 years. I've kind of lost track. And what I really like to teach in my classes is a lot about pattern paper and just really how versatile it is. So pattern paper, color, texture, and just mixing all those things together is really what we're going to do today in our creative collage class. So we are going to make a single and a double page layout using different simple techniques that you can incorporate to many different types of projects after these ones, using the Go The Scenic Route collection by Paige Evans, which is just gorgeous and beautiful. It is a pretty bold color collection, so if you want to use different patterns than I've chosen, you can absolutely do that. This kit you will have plenty left over for other projects. A little bit about me, for those of you that don't know me, I'm a Canadian girl. I'm from the middle of Canada in Winnipeg. We're about 3 hours north of Fargo, North Dakota, for those in the US who might want to kind of figure that out. I work full-time, and when it comes to scrapbooking, I really love bright, bold colors, paper, sewing, and lots of layers. So that's just a little bit about me and my style. We're going to incorporate all those things today into this class. So here's a couple sneaks of the projects we're going to work on. The first one is this single page layout. So you can see we have a lot of layers built in, a lot of colors and pattern. We're going to create with this, and what's left over from this class, we're going to create a double page layout. So you can see here, we are going to create a fun set of embellishments to use on your page, using similar technique to the first page, but just slightly different with a little twist. You can get a little close up here of what exactly we're creating. We're gonna have tons of fun. You're gonna have a blast. We're gonna get some stuff done in the next 2 hours. I'm happy to have you all here with me. Hopefully we make some new friends along the way. And really, let's just have some fun getting creative and crafty together.
So I'm always looking for new ways to use my pattern paper on my scrapbook pages, and the idea of collage came to me one day searching through the internet, and I found these really great images I have here on the screen. And really, what do we know of collage is it's a composition of different materials. So in class today, we're going to be using pattern paper in different ways. And what I love about these images, what inspired me for this class, are the different patterns, the different variations of color, even a little bit of the shape that you see in the bird, and how overlaying those textures together create a lovely project. So let's take a look at the kit and what's inside. So I'm going to set these aside here and take a look at what we need as a base. So we're going to be using a lot of different color and pattern and texture. So keeping some cardstock handy, like this white cardstock and the mint, will really ground out our projects. You can see we have a lovely collection of different pattern papers from the Scenic Route by Paige Evans. We have some really great collection of both feminine and masculine patterns, and you will have some choice as we work through the class to decide what papers you want to use. So you will have some freedom in making it a little less girly or a little more masculine if you want. We are going to set these 2 watercolor papers aside, so please don't cut into those until it's time to do the double page layout. But we are going to use a good amount of this square pattern paper. A paper like that is really good to use in any project because you have a variety of different patterns and different colors. Same with this one here, that really quilted like pattern. A good floral is always handy to have in case you want to cut some items out. And the one thing I love about that one is the back side of it. It's really pretty as well. This paper here is great for cutting out a variety of different colors. And then again, another good floral in case you want to do some fussy cutting. So that's our kit today, and we're going to put all the pattern paper aside just for now and take a look at the embellishments and the letters. Now I chose these stickers for the kit because they are a nice black font, which I really love that you have an uppercase and a lowercase mixed together. And the black's just a nice grounding neutral element to the other colors that are in the page. And then we have 2 packs of embellishments. One are these journaling tags, and the second is a floral embellishment. And I just thought I'd share a tip of how I organize these packages. I like these sandwich bag zip top bags, just some ones from the dollar store or cheaper. Is what I use. And I just like taking everything out of these, the packaging that the manufacturers create the images in, and I dump everything in there. I really have a hard time digging through and keeping, maintaining that packaging. So I gave up on that a few years back, and I just rip into it when I get my package and dump everything into Ziploc bags. So I'm going to do the same thing with my floral embellishments as well. It just makes things easier when you go to dig through and find out what you're looking for. And I like to cut off the back of the packaging with the images inside, and I'll put that in my Ziploc bag just so I can kind of see what is supposed to be in there, and it also shows me what collection that came with. So, that's also a good reference. Now you also have this heart template in your instructions. Please make sure you cut that off the back, and we'll cut those down later on. For the first project we're going to do is a single page. We are going to just trim off that UPC from the Aqua, I guess it's called Aqua, cardstock, and we're going to create a circle using a 9-inch paper plate. You can see here my paper plate is 9 inches, and I'm just finding the center of the paper plate to be able to kind of line it up onto my cardstock. Now, if you have a digital cutter, you absolutely could cheat here, and you can run this Aqua cardstock through your digital cutter and have a circle just in the middle of your page. But if you don't, you can absolutely find the hole by piercing through the middle of that paper plate and marking it to the center of your cardstock. And what I'm doing is I'm just going to poke my pencil through the middle and line it up with that little crosshatch I made by finding the center of my pattern paper. Sometimes you got to make it a little bit bigger so you can actually see it, but that's how I'm going to line mine up. Again, if you have a digital cutter, this makes very quick work, and you can also alternately do something like a circle, other than a circle, sorry. You could do a heart or a star or even some sort of like octagon or a different shape like that would be really cool. But I'm just going to go ahead and trace this out, as you can see, and I didn't bring an X-Acto knife with me to do this, but if you had one, it would probably be better than scissors. But I'm just going to kind of poke a hole in my cardstock and then go ahead and just trim out that circle. I'm going to kind of stick to my pencil line because I don't want it to be messy, because you are going to see this edge quite crisply when we have our layout completed. So you do have to have some care when you go around your circle in making sure that it's not really too willy-nilly. So again, if you do have a digital cutter, hit pause on this video and you can absolutely run your paper through the digital cutter and create that design easily. Would not be a problem whatsoever. But for those of you who are old school like me, although I have a digital cutter, sometimes doing it this simple way is just as fast and just as easy. So I'm going to go ahead and just trim this out. I'm not worrying too much about the pencil lines. I am cutting it off. If you find that you have a bit of a pencil line left over after you've trimmed out the circle, just make sure you give that a little bit of an erase with your eraser. And I'm going to set that mint cardstock aside. I'm not going to use it for my project, but it's absolutely an alternative for when we do some of the cutting down later. If you wanted to add some of the mint into this, you definitely could use that as well. But it is a bit of a scrap at this point. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing with my circle onto my white cardstock, but I've decided I wanted to add a bit of machine stitching just to add a little bit of detail to the edge of that cutout circle. This is not a necessary step, and you absolutely don't need to sew if you're not interested in doing that. I know a lot of people can't be bothered with sewing machines, but it just adds a nice little bit of texture. Alternatively, if you didn't want to sew, you could use a black journaling pen and just make some small little dots around the edge of that circle line, and you can also run a tracing wheel from your sewing supplies into a black ink pad and run that around the edge of the circle, and that will give you kind of a little bit of a dotted faux stitching line. So a few different alternatives if you don't want to use a sewing machine for the actual stitching on your project. I mean, if you have patience and you'd like, you could also hand stitch around that. That's probably would be a bit of homework for you, but you can do the same thing hand stitched as well. I would recommend maybe a similar tone on tone to this mint aqua color, or a bit of a white, nothing too stark to make it jump out as much if you were going to hand stitch. Now, as you can see, I'm adding copious amounts of foam adhesive to the back of this aqua cardstock. I'm using squares, so I'm going to use quite a bit of these Gina K foam squares to the back of my design. If you have a foam tape roll, you could make much quicker work than I am doing right now with this, and just rip off strips and add that to the back. And the reason we're doing this is because when we do our collaging in a few minutes, it's going to create quite a bit of texture and dimension on our page. And we really want to make sure we almost have a place to house that together on the project. So the foam squares are a great tip for whenever you want to add dimension, obviously, because it's still going to ensure that this project's going to fit into your page protector. I get asked a lot, about that in class is this going to fit in my page protector? It's pretty chunky, and foam adhesive is really meant to be in a page protector. So yes, it will. So I'm just adding that to I'm not sticking it down yet. I'm just kind of placing it so I can have that as a marker of where I want to put my circle so that it will line up later. And I'm just going to add a circle to one sheet of that white cardstock. Now again, do not use these papers for what we're going to do now. Please set those aside so we don't cut into them. But we are going to go through the rest of the papers now in the kit and do a little bit of cutting and get some scraps to make our collage. I'm going to start by cutting down one sheet of this squared paper here with all the different patterns on it. Again, it's a really great concept to have in a kit, is to have a paper that draws in a lot of different color and pattern. And so I'm going to kind of cheat a bit and use this for the most of my collage on this page. You will have a lot of extra paper you can use to bring into your project as well. So if you don't want to use some of those pink tones, or you don't want to use a lot of the navies that are in here, you have some other choices like that other square watercolor paper that's in the kit. You could absolutely cut that apart as well. So I'm just going to cut these down into the squares, as you can see here on the screen. And then I'm actually going to cut them down in half. So each square is going to become a 1.25 inch by 2.5 inch rectangle. And again, if you don't really need to measure with this if you don't want to, and in fact, some of them you can even leave large squares if you wanted, but I am going to cut this entire sheet down each of the squares, and then again I'm going to cut each of the strips. So what I'm going to do now, just to make quicker work, is to cut each of the rows of squares in half to get my rectangles, and then I'm going to go ahead after that and trim those down by each of the different patterns. Just makes it easier and quicker work on your trimmer versus cutting each square and cutting each square in half. So just a bit of a speed tip, I guess, for you on your trimmer. I really like this guillotine trimmer. I've had this one for probably about 15 years. It's still very sharp and very good. If you have, one of those rotary cutters, that works really well. Sometimes the ones with the smaller blades, the trimmers you can get, it's difficult to cut smaller pieces, but absolutely still works just as well. And again, just trim down all the squares and set them aside. We are going to use these not just for the single page we're creating now, but we will also use them on the double page layout. So please don't feel like you're doing a lot of work to have a lot of extra, because we will use maybe not every single piece that we're doing right now, but we will use the majority of it on this project alone. What I love about a paper like this as well is not only does it bring in a lot of colors and patterns, it's really an inexpensive way to add a lot of variety to your layout. So, if it's a bit of a budget-minded thing for you, buying a paper such as this is really a great way to stretch kind of your supplies. If you have scraps, that would also be a really great alternative to use up some of those smaller pieces as doing a project that we're doing today. So if later on you wanted to recreate this page using different paper, it would absolutely work using some of those scraps you have, or even just different plain colors of cardstock would be really pretty, I think, in addition to all the different pattern papers. So again, I just finish off cutting the last of these pieces here, and then I'm going to set them aside and organize them a little bit by the pattern and the color that they are. And the reason you want to do that is just because as you're going to work through your design, it's just going to make it a little bit easier to find kind of the color or the pattern that you might be looking for. So I'm just going to really quickly go ahead and do that. And some of these, you'll see there's a B-side to this paper, obviously, that you could flip some of these over and use as well. So keep that in mind as you're going through your design. If you decide you don't want to use some of the colors that are in here, if you flip it over, you will have a nice, I believe it's like a teal mint kind of pattern paper on the back. So that will give you a little bit more of that color and pattern as well. So the good thing what we're going to do now is essentially fill in that circle that we've created on our page. And to be honest, the fastest way that is to do this is to just add a whole lot of adhesive down to your page. So for this, we're going to use some tape runner, and then later on, we're going to go back in with foam squares. For now, I'm just going to add a really healthy amount, as you can see, of tape runner just to the bottom half of my circle. Not that it's going to dry out a lot, but I don't want it to have, I want to be able to stick and move things around. I want to have some freedom on the page. So at this point, I'm really just, this is where you really have to be free. If you're a bit of a measurer, you may have a hard time getting started. But what I want you to remember as we work through this is we're making a bit of an artistic collaged piece. So we're going to go ahead and rip, tear, trim, and place these rectangles all across the bottom of that circle, making sure that we just overlap and fill in that area. It doesn't need to be perfect. In fact, I encourage you to work across the bottom of your circle and start off as I did there, you can see, with alternating up and down and across to create a bit of a variety of the pattern. You have a lot of freedom here in how you place your papers, as far as what papers you'd like to choose, and there is no measuring involved. So what I want you to do is really be free with this. I want you to choose patterns and colors that you like for the photos that you're going to use, and start across the bottom of that circle, as you can see I've done, and really use your scissors or even just tearing strips to create and build a pattern across. So if you start on the bottom row, as you can see I used one larger kind of rectangle on one side, and then I trimmed off two little pieces beside it. And that's how I just started my base row. As I'm starting to move higher up into my circle, you can see I'm just offsetting the papers slightly, and I am tearing some of them. And what that tearing does is it adds a little bit of texture. You don't need to tear. It's honestly very quick and easy. As you can see, I'm just ripping through so that white core shows through with the pattern paper. Alternatives to this are very many. If you have a decorative edge punch you want to use, that's really pretty. You could punch along the edge of some of these to get that kind of texture. You could use fringe scissors, which honestly I wish I had used in my project. I think that would have looked really fun to have just a little bits of fringe in some of these pieces. But again, tearing is honestly really fast and easy and no stress, and everybody can do it. No cost involved. So just I encourage you not to place every single piece that you place down straight with the pattern paper, but to add some of them that are torn. I don't think that I would necessarily tear all the papers or punch all the papers, just because I think that would be just maybe a little too busy with all the color and pattern we have going on. But certainly doing some of the strips that were torn or maybe fringed, even decorative scissors obviously would work along the edge of some of those strips. Just having a few of those peeking through your layers will certainly just add a nice element of texture to the collage that we're making. Now, a few tips, I guess, as you work through your own collage piece is, number one, don't be hard on yourself. All these papers came from one set in the kit, so it all goes. You can't really make a wrong selection. Some things I'm keeping in mind as I lay my papers down is really, I want to make sure I don't have a lot of one color saturated in one area. So I'm making sure that I have a good variety of colors and patterns across my page. And you have a lot of flexibility because I'm using a ThermoWeb tape runner, but it allows me to kind of lift things off a little bit. So if you rip the paper because you've flipped something up and your cardstock rips a little, that's okay because you can cover it up later. But making sure that you just stagger things and really be free with it. Now you can see here on the screen, I'm decided to go in, now that I have a few layers created, and add some foam adhesive to some of the pieces. I actually end up doing this to almost all the pieces that I've laid down. This is definitely something you could do after after this phase. Once the whole circle gets filled in, you could do that. You could absolutely do it as we're doing now as we go, but it's not necessary to do it to all the pieces. But what I really love about the foam adhesive is that it adds just another bit of layer of pop. And as we place that aqua cardstock on later, because that's going to kind of cover up our entire edge of this project, is that it's really going to have those pieces that are collaged here that we're working on pop up to the same height as that aqua cardstock. So it's all going to be kind of not one dimensional, but it's going to be one layer when you put it into your page protector, into your album. So I am just adding this on. I do like placing foam adhesive for some, I think it's a habit now, but I just use a bit of a paper piercer to do that. And now that I've kind of decided I really enjoy the foam, what I've decided to do is add foam kind of as I work and lay down my pieces. So when I am certain I'm going to be sticking something down, I'm just adding foam to the bottom portion of that either rectangle or square, whatever piece it is. So I'm just going to do that as I go and just keep making sure that I'm filling in all little pieces of that circle design. So I'm going to keep continuing. Honestly, again, try not to make this very difficult on yourself. Be free with it. This is a lot of play. That's very simple to do, but I can see how somebody can really get caught up in the minutia of picking the patterns and the designs. So don't be hard on yourself. Just have a lot of fun with it. And again, just create dimension and texture very easily by tearing and using smaller pieces mixed with with larger pieces, sorry. And as you can see, I'm doing here. So those rectangles you can turn vertically instead of horizontally. You can flip the back side, as you can see, is that teal kind of mandala pattern. That is also very pretty. So make sure you're utilizing whatever patterns of paper you want. And making sure that you don't have too many florals together or too much blue in one area. So what I'm doing here is I've noticed I kind of have two little pieces of orange and I'm making that visual triangle. So I put that third piece of the orange in that upper right area now. So you can kind of see that there's a triangle between those three pieces of the orange paper that I have there on my page. That's just a bit of a design tip that we use when making projects. I'm going to do kind of a similar thing here with the yellow because I realized that yellow, is a nice little triangle there with the other two that I've placed earlier. And if you have any kind of weird little tiny areas, you can absolutely trim out the tiniest piece because all that stuff that's overlapping your circle area is going to be cleaned up neatly later once we put our cardstock over top. So don't worry too much about just sticking completely within that circle. It's okay if you overlap a little bit as you move through your design. There's absolutely no wrong way of doing this. It's just really a matter of having fun and playing with the paper. Things like this I just love because I love making use of I guess for lack of a better word, trash. So a lot of people would not like to use a lot of scraps of paper to create their project, but you can see that it's really creating a nice variety. Now I am bringing in two more papers. I've decided I wanted to add a little bit more color. So I'm going to cut 1.25 inch strip now off of this floral paper, as well as this one here, this blue mandala paper. I'm going to cut 1.25 inch strip, and that's really just to line up with the same size I've used earlier. I'm not going to trim these down into square, like rectangles. Instead, I'm just going to rip and tear to kind of get my pieces and use my scissors to kind of continue on with the design. So I'm going to do that right now, as you can see, and it makes kind of quick work of that so you don't have a lot of extra trimming down to do. And what I love about those two papers specifically is you have really nice patterns on both sides. So I have that nice kind of fuchsia strip from that. It's to be honest, it's a world map paper. And then the mandala, which has like a nice kind of purpley kind of floral in the background. So you have 4 different paper options now to choose from. You can see I've added more adhesive now along the top part of my circle. And again, I'm just not measuring anything. I'm really being free and ripping and tearing and just trimming down the pieces as I go. And if you haven't noticed yet, I am keeping all the extra. I'm not throwing away these tiny little pieces that I have gathered along the top. I'm keeping those because those are really great fillers for all this space that you need. So make use of everything you have. Don't worry at all about when to toss something. We are going to keep a lot of that for a double page layout later. So all these extra little scraps that are torn or trimmed off that are tiny, we're going to use all that up. We're going to make really good use of the product and the paper in this kit. So again, if you have like a little tiny area like I have here, just trim down the paper to fit, make it, lift things and overlap them. It's really just adding to that whole collage feel. So I like to think of this as clean collage. And what we'll do in the second page is more of a bit of a messier collage, although still very clean in many respects. So honestly, really have a lot of fun with this and just work all the way across the top of your project. And really honestly have a lot of fun with it. So Just making sure that you do fill in that circled area, because it's very easy to kind of forget about the rounded corners as you kind of work up the design. You'll see, I'll show you later on that I actually did that and how I filled that in. So we'll talk about that just in case. But if you're able to make sure that you do that beforehand, it'll make things a little bit easier for you later. And I also just want to remind you to make sure that you turn things horizontally. So those strips, I'm using a lot of vertical pieces. So I really want to make sure I put some horizontal ones in. And what that does is just add a lot of movement and flow to your project. If things look a little too close together, you can lift them up and move them. I often do that. It's kind of nice just to be able to stick things down quickly onto that textured cardstock background. So, having that adhesive down on there makes pretty quick work of this. And again, I'm using the foam as I work, but you definitely don't need to. You could absolutely go in later on and just lift, even when your whole project is almost completed, just add that foam to the pieces you want to have lifted up later on. So you could do that as well, because I know foam's not always super reasonably priced, but trust me, I think it's totally worth the money to use foam adhesive. It's worth every penny, because I think it just adds so much really, honestly, cheap texture to anything. Any sticker, you can make it look chunky by just adding that foam. So I am going to go ahead and just place a few pieces down here. Sometimes you kind of get to a point where you're like, geez, I have that little space, as you can see, right in the middle of my page. And I think it's got me a little bit stuck. So it's really, I'm trying to think of how to fill in that and with what color. And sometimes you just need to do a bit of a longer piece to make that happen. So I believe I'm going to fill that in now with more of a neutral kind of color. And I decided just to use a tiny little bit, almost to just fill in that gap. And then I'm going to cover up that little piece later anyway. And don't forget, we are going to put photos over top of this. We are going to do a little bit of embellishing. Not a lot, because there is a lot of paper going on. We don't really need a ton of embellishing, but we will do a little bit. So some of these areas that you may not be super happy about, I wouldn't worry about too much, because you will cover up some of it later on when we put the rest of the layout together. I really love this yellow paper, and I love the stripe. I don't have a lot of stripe in this pattern so far, so I really wanted to go in and add that. However, I didn't want to add my torn edge on the side, because I hadn't done that with any of the others. So all my torn edges, as you can see, are all kind of facing down. I hadn't really realized that actually until I've just played this back now, but you really want to make sure that you keep that in mind too. I mean, it's absolutely acceptable to switch that up and have some of the torn edges to the side. You could do that. I would just encourage you to make sure that that's a theme you carry through the entire piece of your collage design. So, just a few little things to keep in mind. But again, there really are not a lot of rules, and this can be kind of therapeutic and fun. Just make sure that you don't stress yourself out about it. And, the best part I think about this is really there is no measuring. And I know I have some friends out there who are probably watching who have been in my class before, and I think she knows who she is in one particular place, that the non-measuring is really going to be hard for people. And I totally get that, but I hope that going through this process really helps kind of break you from that, because this is art, what we're doing. It's supposed to be fun, it's supposed to be freeing. And I don't, sometimes when we work in those constraints, it can be almost a little stressful when it doesn't quite all measure up in the way we think it should. And really, and I think I've said this before, is really what I want you to be doing in this process is really go for an imperfectly perfect design. So what you're doing here is really taking random pieces of paper, which is what is in a collage, and making it look perfect. Because once you have it all kind of together, you're going to see that circle frame we created a few moments ago is really going to pull all of this color together. So, just remember that as you go through that this is really a fun and freeing process, and there's really nothing wrong with it. And the best part of what I think we're doing here, and what I really try to incorporate into all my classes with Crop and Create, is that a lot of you are going to have different choices. So as we're going through our paper design, some of you may want to have a completely feminine pink on pink on pink design, lots of flower patterns, and that's absolutely great. And some of you are going to want to have the more masculine, and some of you are going to completely mix it up like I did. And what I like about this is that I think there's roughly 900 of you taking this class today, and we're going to have 900 different versions of this project. And to me, that's really exciting because I think it's great when we're all inspired by each other. And I really want you to take the idea of the collage in this class and apply it in your own sort of way. I want you to feel like, no one's judging you, that, what you're making is just as great as what the next person has made. We're all really just trying to follow the same concept. And I really can't wait for you guys to share later on with me how you have taken what we did in the class and kind of made it your own. I really want to see that. So that part's really exciting to me, is just how each of you is going to create the exact same design using the same papers, but different choices are going to make it look so different. So I'm excited for that. So please make sure you share all that with us later on, because I know each of you in this class will like to see other people's takes on it as well. And so I'm just continuing along my design here, filling it in. It's kind of starting to look really cool. It's almost looking like a heart right now before I finish filling in that center area. And that makes me think, instead of that circle, like I had mentioned earlier, if you have a digital cutter, you could absolutely cut a heart or a star shape. Something like that would look really, really cool. And you could definitely recreate this exact same design again. I think a star would be cool for a boy page, a little boy page, or a Halloween project. I think that with some like Halloween themed papers would be really, really cool. So again, the idea is to get inspired by the collage sort of effect we're creating with these papers, and really, I hope you use this again. I hope this is not a one and done sort of project. So, just think as you're working through different ways you could use this again. I think this would look really cool on a card, even on one portion of a layout, maybe like on the left side of one part of a layout. I think that would look cool. It doesn't need to be an entire background. We're doing that because this is like the main focal point of our project today, but you could absolutely recreate this with different pieces of paper and different strips later on in smaller ways to add a lot of impact. So just finishing up the top part now and getting near the end, you can see my paper choices are dwindling. So if that's like you, and you're worried that you're not going to have enough, trust me, what I have on the screen here is still a lot of paper. And again, if you feel the need to cut more down as you go, you absolutely can do that. We are going to use these pieces anyway for the next project, so your work on that is not wasted. So if you do have more paper than this left over, that's totally fine, because we are going to use it later anyway. So it's one of those waste not, want not things. You're just saving yourself a little bit of work later on. And again, just work with the scraps that you have to fill in your entire area until you have your circle shape. And make sure everything is stuck down quite nicely. I don't know what I did with this one piece here, but I fiddle around with it just quite a little bit actually, and I moved that red polka dot around a few times. But I have my circle basically completed now, so I'm quite happy with how it's turned out. You can already see all the dimension on there from the foam. I love the variations of the pattern, and you can see I'm going to put that aqua cardstock now over top, and it's going to it reminds me of a piñata, that you can actually see all that paper peeking through. So this is a bit of work as well, is to peel all the foam backing off of that. So I'm going to cheat out and edit just a little bit of that out from the video. But once you get your backing off, you're going to want to lay that over top of your design and just line up the edge of one piece of your cardstock to the other. And you do need to be careful if apparently I was off center just ever so slightly. So my cardstock circle was off just a little. I had to turn it 90 degrees to get it to fit properly. But however, if you have a little gap, I'm going to show you right now how you can fill that in. So you can see here on the left side that I have a little bit of that white cardstock showing. So just take your extra scraps, add some adhesive to the back, and just ever so slightly lift up your side there of the cardstock and stick down little scraps of paper with adhesive. So make sure you add some adhesive to the back if you haven't already done so. I have a little bit of adhesive showing, so I don't really need to do that. But absolutely, make sure you have tape runner on the back of that. This one, I guess, needed a little bit extra. You could also lift up and tuck things in from the inner part of the circle and pushing it underneath that cardstock as well. You could cut them skinnier. any sort of way, as you're looking through around your circle here, any pieces there's an extra, any little bits you think need just a little more layer to them. So up at the top there, I feel like there's like there needs to be just like a bit of a smaller overhang to that fuchsia paper in the top. So this may be me being nitpicky with myself, I'm going to lift and add some extra layers in around that top portion. Anywhere else around the edge of your circle you think needs to be filled in just a little bit more, you can do that. You can always go back later too, once you're done the project, as a bit of homework. If there's something that you see you want to fill in, you can obviously do that later as well. It doesn't need to be done at this point, but take the time now before we add our photos and our title to really fill in any sort of areas that you feel needs just an extra little zhuzh, any extra little bit there. I did feel I need a little bit more of a horizontal element across the top, so I'm going to add this little just touch of navy across the top to fill in my circle there. I'm trying to decide if I want to add any more pieces. I do feel like I want a little bit more yellow to this as well, so I know I just added that navy and I'm going to cover up some of it. But again, don't get carried away like I think I'm doing right now, as I'm getting a little bit lost in some of the minutia. You kind of have to know when to step away and say, I'm done. So I have a couple photos printed out for this. Because you have a lot of color, I don't recommend you use super colorful photos. Mine are pretty, they're not black and white photos, but they're a pretty, neutral background. So I'm not really adding a lot of extra color. I'm going to add a little tiny drops of black mist to the back of that aqua cardstock, just to add a little bit of neutral to the aqua, so that, you have a bit of an eye rest to it. And then I'm going to use my photos here to add a little bit of more of the neutrality to this project. So again, if you have really colorful photos, be careful with that, only because you have so much color in your background. I recommend with something like this, you probably want to use a bit of a black and white photo. Mine have a tiny bit of color. As you can see, it's a really neutral shot as it is naturally. So I'm just going to leave them as they are. But on the next page, you'll see I use only black and white photos. And that's just to add a good balance. Sometimes if you have too much of one thing, it's not always great, right? So in this case, I really still want my photos to be the star of the show. I know we've done a lot of work here at the background, creating this really fun background. But you really want your photos to be the star. So I like to make sure that my photos are a bit of a contrast to the background. So for me, I have these photos, they're neutral, and I'm going to add these to just a scrap of white cardstock from my own stash. This is not left over from the kit. You don't need to do this. It's just I'm a bit weird. I love to mount my photos on white cardstock. And I do usually, when I print them, have a bit of a border around the edge, but the way I printed these two particular photos, I ended up trimming off the border. It just wasn't an even enough border between them. So I am going to add scrap white cardstock behind each of them, just so that they are evenly, have the same feel. And it's just going to add a nice little border, I guess, between the background design and my photos. Because in the end, your photos are really why you're doing this whole scrapbooking thing anyways, right? They should really be what stands out on your page. Even though we've done all this beautiful collaging, we want that to show. But really, you want to have your memories out there. That is what you're really capturing. So I'm really going to put these here in that top left corner of the page. I thought about it, and I wanted to add just honestly a little bit more color, if you can believe it. And yellow is a really great neutral. A lot of people, I think, are not a big fan of yellow, but this yellow here, to me, is a really great neutral. So I'm going to add a healthy strip of that behind each of the photos that I've matted. Again, you don't need to mat your photos. You could just take your photos and do it on the yellow paper as it is. That would be fantastic. And this is just going to add another layer to our already very layered page. Sorry, I need a sip of water there. So I'm just going to take my foam adhesive off, to be honest, because I put that behind my photos as I use foam adhesive for all of my photos always. I find it just is a really great way to have them pop on my project. I don't have to worry about them kind of soaking into the background. So I'm going to I took them off, and then I'm going to add that to the back of the cardstock, the pattern paper later on. And these foam adhesives, these are Gina K foam adhesives. They're really kind of forgiving for something like this. Sometimes you'll rip them off and they're just kind of wasted. So be smarter than me and just put your foam adhesive on where it belongs. So I'm just adding a few pieces here to each of the corners and then the center of my photo. So I'm going to peel that backing off, and then as I said earlier, I'm going to put those photos down in that top left corner of the circle. And you could absolutely vary where you put your photos here. If you find that there's an area on your circle that you're not super happy with how it turned out, this is a great opportunity to move your photos maybe to the bottom right corner or the top right corner or the bottom left corner. So if you have one, you just would need to change where your title goes a little bit. But I am going to kind of line mine up. I think it's going to be about 4 inches down, roughly 3 inches down from the top. Again, I don't really measure, and we're not measuring a lot in this particular layout, but I am going to put them on a slight angle. And the reason I'm doing that is because we have a lot of up and down going on in our collage. So that slight angle just kind of helps add a little bit more dimension and makes you see the photos a little bit better. I know that might sound silly, but that's part of my thinking with that. I am taking these small foam stickers out of the packaging, and I did staple the clear backing to the packaging, and that's just going to help keep them in place. Otherwise, I have a hard time getting them in and out of the packaging. So that's just another little tip for you. And we are going to use a combination of the larger black thickers and the smaller foam stickers that came in the kit. I really love all the little tiny words and the different colors. So I'm going to start off just along the top edge here of that photo where I have it on my page. I'm going to use UR from the thickers, and I'm going to just start going along the curve. Again, I'm not measuring anything. I'm really just using the curve to make sure that I am curving my title along the edge. So I'm going to say UR, and then I thought it would be fun to incorporate those smaller stickers there to finish off my title, going as far along the curve as I can. These stickers, the foam stickers, are themed for travel, but just because something's themed travel doesn't mean it needs to be a travel themed project that we create. So I often will buy something because of what it looks like, not at all the theme of the actual collection that it's in. So I'm going to go ahead and just use the obvious words right away that are not travel themed and continue on along the curve of my page. And again, I'm using a paper piercer to pick this up. I think this is just really a habit for me. I always have a hard time. I don't have long nails, so I have a hard time peeling these off sometimes. So I found for me this really small paper piercer I've had, it's a Heidi Swap paper piercer that I think I've had for about at least 10 years. My initial one broke, and a friend of mine gave me hers because she was super nice to do that. Because I almost live by it. If I don't have this, I don't know what I'm going to do to place my letter stickers. For me, it's just a nice way to kind of place the sticker, feel like I have a little bit more control over it. So I'm just using that it actually helps me pick out the little insides of the foam stickers, as you can see here, because there's tiny little sticker pieces inside the ampersands. So it helps me clean that up. It's just a handy tool. I know Tim Holtz has one that's a little longer. It is actually just as pokey as this one. It's actually very good as well. I kind of like this one because it fits into my hand, but I know a lot of you may have a longer one, and that would work just as well. So just continue choosing whatever words you feel necessary. Obviously, if you have travel themed photos that you're doing, you don't have to think too much outside the box. There's some really great travel themed words in here. But when you place each of your words down, leave a little bit of a gap, because I am going to show you later on that I go in later and fill in the gaps in between the words. So I'll show you that in the close-up shots at the end of this part of the class. But just leave little spaces throughout your words so that's easy to read. If you have it too close together, it's a little bit too clustery, because we do have a lot already going on our project, and we don't want to have too much. So I think I'm going to leave it there. I'm not going to add a whole lot more words at this point. But now what I want to do is bring in some of these embellishments. So I'm going to start with the journaling package. And what I do when I'm starting any project is I kind of go through and I find the ones that I think work best, the things that I like, not necessarily like most, but the more of the everyday sort of things. I try to sort embellishments out by grouping kind of as I go. So I have all the butterflies there together. I'm very likely to use butterflies for this page just because it's kind of girly in the way I'm doing it. So I'm very likely to use that. I like adding a photo tab to photos. Again, I think this has become a bit of a routine for me, but I am going to add a photo tab to that top left corner of that photo. And then I'm just kind of going through and deciding what else do I think will work in here. There's a ton of great embellishments in here. I love all these tickets. There's fun photo tabs. There's little journaling cards. I'm not going to add a lot of journaling to this page because there is a lot going on. If you do want to add some journaling and that's really important to you, my suggestion would be using one of those pre-printed cards and adding that as a layer underneath your two photos there, and just having your hand journaling on there. If you wanted to do a bit of a printed journaling, you could absolutely do that by printing on your printer, making strip journaling, and putting it in that bottom left corner under the photos. I feel like that's just a good, happy balancing area to where you have your larger title above the project there. So I'm just going to quickly kind of flip through here and see if there's anything else I want to add. I'm trying not to add too much from an embellishment perspective, just because we really do have a lot of pattern, a lot of color, and a lot of texture happening already on our page. Sometimes doing these projects, it's really a lot about knowing when to stop. I think sometimes we almost can't help ourselves and we just keep going and going and going and we keep adding and adding. And sometimes that's not good. We need to know when to stop ourselves and say, okay, that's enough. I don't want to add too much. I am going to add this little heart, and it almost is a bit of a cheat. It kind of just fills in like a layer we did on our collage. So I'm going to add a little foam underneath that so it kind of just flows with our collage. And then I am going to add these butterflies, and I'm going to do that with some glue dots. I find that's kind of the easiest way to stick these down. I did bend, as you can see, the edges of the butterfly to add some dimension. And then the glue dot goes just in the middle of the back of that. And then I just simply press that down onto the project. So you still get that kind of dimensional butterfly thing happening. If you wanted to, you could put foam adhesive behind the butterflies as well later on. I won't do that. I think the way it is right now, there's enough dimension that it's going to stick the butterflies the way I want them. And when I put them in the page protector, they're going to stay like that. So I'm not super concerned. So just a few more little tiny details. I don't want to add too much, but here's some close-ups. Look at all that texture we created. Look at all that lovely layers. It's so fantastic. I love how this one turned out. It's so much fun. You can see here I add a little tiny strip to the edge of my left photo. You'll see more in the instructions. But lots of fun, lots of color, and just a really great way to use that collage inspiration piece on a single page scrapbook. I think this is something you could do again. So we're going to clean this up now and get ready to move on to the next project. So grab all your scraps, don't throw them away, put them to the side, and then we'll get ready for the second layout. All right, so let's get started on our double page. So remember those pretty watercolor papers we set aside earlier? That is the base of our project. So what we're going to do now is just trim off those UPCs because nobody needs that. You can keep those UPCs because you may actually need that for what we're going to do in our collage later. So keep those if you'd like. And we're going to use that for the base of our page. We are going to trim down 2 sheets of white cardstock from your kit. One piece is going to be cut down to a 6x10 size, and one piece is 10x10. So either one, so you want one 6x10 piece and one 10x10 piece. I believe that's what we need. So I'm going to go ahead and start off by putting my watercolor back. I'm going to call these watercolor backgrounds because to me they're like a pretty watercolory effect anyway. I'm going to just trim this one to that 6x10. And the 6x10 sheet is going to go onto the left side of the double page layout, and the 10x10 is going to go onto the right side. They're going to be placed about 1 inch from the top and the bottom, just centered in the middle. I'm not going to use a ruler whatsoever, but we are going to use that. And you can see we're going to use a lot more paper from our kit as well. There are some papers, I'll be honest, we use very little or not at all. I'm just trying to decide now if I want to add any of that in. We are going to cut down this paper as well. It's going to be to a piece that's 2 inch by 6 inch. If you don't want to use a floral, you don't have to. On the reverse side of this is a really pretty teal watercolor paper, much like our pink one that we have here. So if you want to reverse that, you absolutely could as an alternative. So you can do that. You can see here these two papers here are the same. So I'm going to actually just flip it so that it's not a side-by-side identical piece, so that you kind of have that 180-degree flip. So it kind of looks like the paper flows across both sides. And now I'm just going to put those pieces of paper that we've trimmed down and get those ready to stick down on my page. And you can see how those are going to line up. Again, I'm not measuring anything, but I can tell you, for those that like to, that it's about 1 inch from the top, 1 inch from the bottom is where you're going to put all of those pieces. I am going to use a border punch here. I have two different choices. I decided to go with this more lacy, scallopy edge punch. I think this is a Martha Stewart punch. And I'm just going to use the scrap of that 6x12 or cardstock that was remaining. And I'm going to cut along the edge of one side of that. Sorry, that's a 6x10 that's left over here. And I'm just going to punch all along the edge, and I'm going to trim it down to 10 inches long. So you just really want to, whatever edge punch you use, if you decide you want to use maybe a notebook style one or a different scallop one, you really just want to trim off that design. Usually it's about a 1/2 inch or so. They're not much deeper than that. And then cut it down into that 10-inch strip. I'm going to cut mine to 1 inch just because I like tucking it under the paper for some weird reason. I kind of like doing that. But if you're just going to run it along the edge, trim it down to about a 1/2 inch piece will work. So I'm going to just look at that. I'm actually going to use a ruler, and I'm going to line that up about 1 inch from the top, inch from the bottom along the middle of my page, and just start getting these things stuck down. I'm going to get those committed to the page, and just a little bit of adhesive. I'm going to make sure my page lines up, and then stick down the second side here. I'm going to add my floral piece. Again, if you wanted to use this watercolor side, you could absolutely do that. That would be super pretty. That's a great alternative to the floral. And then I'm going to use this decorative punched edge. And what I like to do is just kind of lift up the edge slightly and tuck that under. Now, when I put adhesive down, I don't always add it right to the very, very edge of the page. And that's the reason why. So I still have the ability to just slightly tuck things under. And I do that a lot. So when you put your adhesive down, leave it like a bit of a 1/4 inch gap if you can. That gives you time later on in case you want to add something. You're not limited by where your adhesive is. Now, I'm going to add a bunch of sewing to this project in a couple different ways. Initially, right now, as you can see, I'm going to add it along some of the strips on this paper. I'm going to add it along that row of the decorative punch strip. And then I'm going to add a bit of a box around that cardstock background. You don't have to, like I've mentioned earlier, if you don't like to sew with a sewing machine, you don't have to. I love sewing with my sewing machine on my layouts. I think I sew on 90% of my projects. To me, it's a cheap and easy embellishment. It adds a nice subtle texture. But again, you could use the things I mentioned on the single page as an alternative, like a journaling pen. You could use a ruler to add tiny little dashes all along the same places that I'm doing the machine stitching. We've tried out in class with me before where you take a pattern tracing ruler from your sewing kit stash and run that onto an ink pad, and you can run that along and get really nice tiny little dots that look like faux stitching. And then you can also do hand stitching if you want. I love that look, but I'll be honest, I just don't have the patience. But if you do, that absolutely would be pretty as well. And again, I think just a white on white twine on this would be the best choice for something like that for hand stitching. But if you have that sort of patience, you go for it. I just don't. So again, as we talk about our photos, putting them on the page, we're going to use 6. I believe these are 3.5 inch photos. And I've just made all my photos black and white. So all of these were all taken at different times. So I've made them all black and white so they all kind of go together. And I have pictures of my 3 kids here. I have one of them individually each, as well as kind of group photos in a combination of all of them over the course of the last year. So I'm going to put those kind of on the page, as you can see. But first I want to kind of get prepped to do our collage. So I'm going to cut out 2 of the heart templates, but perfectly honest, you only need 1. So I believe there's one in the class instructions. Please make sure you trim that down. Just trim around the edge of that design so that you have your template. It doesn't need to be perfect. We are literally using this as a template. We're not using it for anything else. So I have 2 here, but absolutely you just need 1. You also need the extra sheet of the white cardstock that is in your kit. And you're going to need some adhesive for this. And you need all your scraps. So all the scraps you have left over so far, pull that out no matter how big or how small. And you also have some choices now because you are going to need to cut more paper. I'm just going to rip a strip off this one here because what we're going to do is going to be a little similar to what we did on the first page. But it is going to be a little more free. There's definitely not a lot of measuring on the first page, but on this one is even less. I am going to cheat a little and use this kind of quilted background and cut a strip off that. I'm also going to tear a strip because I like the background of this as well. I love that yellow. So I want to have a lot of this paper because you can use a lot of this in your collage for a bit of a cheat. And then I'm going to cut down another one of these squared pages again. I believe there's 2 in your kit, so if you cut this one down, it also makes quick work of the collage we'll do on this page. And what we're going to do is cut all these squares again and just get them ready. I'm not going to trim these ones into rectangles as we did before. We'll do a little bit more of that free-flowing tearing or punching if you want to. Again, as an alternative, you could do that here. But for this one, I'm just going to cut these into squares. And then again, use all your strips, all your little extras. If you want to cut the UPCs off all your papers, you could do that. Again, this is really, we're going to have some fun, people. What we're going to do is create the hearts, make embellishments for our page. So we're going to create a collage, much like we did in kindergarten. We are going to do a similar effect like we did. I don't know if you're like me, but you might have done those tissue paper collages in kindergarten or grade 1. We're going to do that with our paper, and we're going to do that and make hearts out of them, and they're going to look great on our page's focal points and embellishments. So as you can see, I'm just cutting a whole bunch of things, strips of paper, not measuring any of it. I'm absolutely measuring nothing. And then I'm going to take my tape runner and I'm going to run it probably, I'm going to say 8 by 12 on the page. So I'm going to cover a good majority of this paper. I mean, to make it easy, you could absolutely do this and just cover the whole sheet. In the end, we're only going to make 7 hearts from this. So I only do, in the end, I think it's about an 8 by 12 area on this cardstock. But if you wanted to, you could cover the whole thing and do the whole thing. But as you can see, what I'm going to do is much similar to what we did earlier. However, I'm not going to add any foam this time, and I'm going to be even less careful about how I place my papers. So I'm taking all my bits, I'm just tucking them under, laying them over top, filling in any little areas. And the idea here is you really just want to make sure that all your pattern is just stuck down really well. I almost want to say the more overlap you have, the better your collage is going to look. In a way, you need to do a bit of a base across your page and then go back and add layers to it. But I just kind of, similarly to what we did in the first project, I am just going to add pieces across and above and just start layering all the way across. So I'm going to kind of work from the left corner all the way across to the right corner all the way across to the left. But again, you can go top to bottom on this if you want. It really doesn't really make a difference. But you want to cover approximately an 8 by 12 area of the page. And if you really love how this is turning out, you can do the whole thing just to even make it easier. The idea with this is that you are being really free. So really just no judgment, no worries about where you're placing your papers. Use bigger pieces, use smaller pieces. Those larger squares we cut, just rip them down, punch them down if you want. I'm not sure fringing would work in this case, only because we are going to be cutting hearts out of this paper later on. So some of that fringe might tear apart and fall off. So I don't know that that would work quite as well as it would have on the single page. But absolutely just keep layering things, tear things down. I do a lot of tearing on this page. There's not a lot of straight edges. And you'll see when we do the finished hearts that actually looks really, I think it looks pretty amazing. Again, don't get too finicky in the details. I think I get stuck myself, as you'll see a few times, where I'm lifting things and trying to make it perfect and, worrying about colors and all of that. But I actually think you need to worry less about all of that because we are going to cut it all out later. Initially, when I started doing this, I had no rules when I started, so I was really just kind of playing around with this idea, and I'm trying to think of how it's going to be and where am I going to cut the hearts later. And I soon realized as I worked through my process that where I thought I might cut the hearts, I actually didn't cut out the hearts later. So don't at all worry about where the hearts are going to go, where the hearts are going to come from at this point. Really just honestly have some fun with this. Use up your scraps, tear pieces, tuck them under, and I'll be honest, I tear a lot of the pieces. Things can absolutely overhang that cardstock edge. Don't worry about that because we can clean that up with some scissors later. And again, if you don't want to kind of adhere with adhesive all across your entire page, you don't have to do that. You can work in small pieces like I'm doing, or you can just go to town and just start adding a whole bunch of adhesive right at the get-go. Any of that is absolutely fine. Because you're adding the adhesive right to the paper, it actually makes quite quick work of this versus adding adhesive to the back of each piece. So I recommend you do that. I mean, adding adhesive to the back of each of these tiny pieces would be time consuming. And I think by now some of you would be throwing tomatoes at your screen or whatever it is you're watching this on, because it could become a huge pain. So really just trim things down. Again, similar strategy to this collage as the one we did on the first page. And that's where you really want to kind of mix up your colors and your patterns. You don't want to have too much of one color in one area. You don't want to have all florals in one area, because the idea is we're making almost like these patchwork collaged hearts later. We really want to have that patchwork feel. So you really want to have a really good mixture of all those different patterns, all those different colors. Again, really, it would look really cool if you did a bit of a monochromatic feel. That would be awesome as well. Again, you can take this any way you want. Again, we're all going to have all 900 of us are going to have different looking collaged hearts later. And to me, that's amazing. This piece of paper I'm using right now is already got a quilted feel to it. So it's a little bit of a cheat. So if you stick that in larger pieces, you already will get that kind of collaged feel without a lot of the work. So, I mean, I wouldn't say use the whole sheet and then add paper across it, because you're still going to lose that texture that you're going to gain from the ripping and the variety of sizes that we are creating on our page. So make sure you're still changing that up, adding in larger pieces, smaller pieces, skinny, like square, rectangle. This would look really cool if you had the punched edges. That would look really cool if you tucked some of those in there. Honestly, I think that this is, right now it kind of looks like a bit of a hot mess, right? But what we're going to make from this after is really going to be pretty and really kind of eye-catching, I think, on our project. So just keep going along and adding those strips of paper. Again, no rules, no problem at all. Just make sure you're adding in all the colors that you want to have in your page. I really want to make sure I have a pretty good variety of color, because I have the 3 kids. I have 2 boys and a daughter. I don't mind using pink on some of my boy pages. I don't have a problem, especially when I feel like I can have all 3 of my kids included. I can sneak in a lot of pink, and it doesn't go very far. Because our watercolor background that we used for the base is pink, has like a lot of highlights of the darker blue as well, and the teal. A lot of that will bring it all together. So please make sure that you just add a good variety of color. Don't, try not to use all the white or neutral patterns. You really want to have a lot of color for this one. So have a lot of fun with it. Move your pieces around. Again, it doesn't need to be perfect. But as you'll notice, I go back in later and I add adhesive underneath some of those overlapping areas. You really do want to make sure that all the edges are stuck down. So if at this point they're not totally stuck down, that's okay. But you will have to go back later, and I'll show you in the video here that I go back in and I add in some adhesive just to make sure that some of those smaller kind of bits are stuck down really, really well. So I'm making pretty good progress. See this collage paper that's in the kit already really helps kind of cheat in making it a little quicker. The good thing about this is, though, you don't really need to worry about any sort of visual triangles or should I need to put orange over here and orange over there, because, I had to make a balance. Some of those designer rules we kind of have for ourselves for projects. When you're making a piece like this, all the windows, they go out all the rules go out the window. So no rules, no wrong way of doing this. And again, 900 of us are going to do this 900 different ways, and it's going to look amazing. You can kind of see in the bottom right corner when I started, I did a lot of tearing, and I was kind of really small clustered when I did it. And I changed my ways as I moved through. I don't know if anybody has noticed that as we've gone through this together, but as I got more across the left side of the page, I used larger pieces, and now I'm kind of tucking things over top. So again, there's no wrong way of doing this. It's just really a matter of creating the collage. And I'm not joking. I'm really having some kindergarten flashbacks here to some projects I probably made for my parents. in the fact that this is reminding me of that whole tissue paper with the Mod Podge thing. But again, I'm just tucking down some of the extra little ends here. I feel like I'm pretty close to being full as done as I think I need to be. I am going to fill in just a few more little areas. And again, don't get caught up in the details. Like I said in the earlier video, part of this video, don't get caught up too much in it, because I feel like we have so many paper choices and so many selections and you want it to be perfect. Don't get caught up in that at all. This is really meant to be an imperfectly perfect sort of design. Really very free kind of project. And I'll be honest, I kind of even love what's happening now here with this background. Some of you might think I'm crazy, but I can see myself using this as a base of a page and just sewing all over it, and adding that texture the way it is. So once you think you've pretty much got it all done, go back in with your adhesive. Just tuck down some of those overhanging areas, because when we do go in later with our heart template to cut out the hearts, you really don't want to have any little pieces that fall off, although I will show you what to do if you do have one, as I had one that fell off my heart. So you can avoid that by just making sure everything is stuck down really well. But again, there's alternatives in case it doesn't. Again, fill in whatever you can, cheat a little bit with that collage paper if you want to. But I really just love the variety of the papers. And I think at this point I am done with how much I need. I'm going to trim off all the excess and stick down what might be missing. We'll stick down a smaller piece here to the corner and stick that down. It's almost a little bit easier if you fill the entire page versus stopping, just for when you get to do your hearts later. But again, you don't need the whole page. So about an 8x12 area is all you need. I have my heart template here, or I have 2 hearts, but you only need 1. And I'm just tucking down my edges and I'm trying to decide where I want to put my hearts. I realize I'm just going to start on one corner and go from there. I'm, not really going to worry too much about anything until I decide, oh, there's a white area on this paper, Nicole. You must fill it with color. There cannot be any white areas, but it's okay if there's a little white area peeking through. Don't get caught up in the details like I just did. Like that was ridiculous for me to rip that kind of up and lift. So that's totally not necessary. So just go ahead, place your heart wherever you think it needs to go. And I'm just going to freely chop in around it. Once we're done with this paper, like we'll be done with this paper, there's no keeping this after, but now just place your heart on top and cut all the way around it to create your heart design. So really simple. Once you have that heart cut out, you just hold it in place and cut it around. I'm not adding a bit of a ridge to it. I'm literally just following right along the edge of that heart and chopping it off. Now, that extra piece that just fell off, if you're weird like me, you would probably keep those squares, rectangles around the heart and cut those out and add those to another paper and stitch around them and make a different background, because that would be cool. But I didn't do that. I should have, because maybe I'll do that another time. But I'm just going to keep going until I have all 7 of my hearts cut out. So you need 7 of them. Now, with your heart template, I have 2 hearts so far that have the heart the same way. I don't know if you can see, maybe on the right hand side of the screen you can see my other heart template. One of the sides has a bit of a higher arc on the heart and one has a little bit of a lower arc. If you flip the heart template over, which I'm going to do, you'll get kind of like the reverse of the heart. So not all your hearts on your project later will flow the same way. So do that. Create a few hearts that are, let's say 3 hearts that are one way, 4 hearts that are the other. It doesn't matter which. I'm not going to tell you. If you want to have them all go the same way, that's okay too. But I did that just to kind of add some dimension when I stick them down on the page later. It just adds a bit of a variation to the design, that's all. So I'm going to put that one aside here, and I'm just going to keep cutting. So I've got 3, 4 more to do. This is where I'm going to flip it over now, and I'm going to cut some more hearts. And again, if you get to an area that you really kind of like and you want to cut that part out from where your heart is, but maybe you didn't fill it in all the way. Maybe you did your 8x12, but that's one area where there's a little white cardstock left over. Cut out your heart anyway, and you can always add some adhesive to the top of the heart in the open area and fill it in with all your little scraps you have there. As you can see, I have quite a good collection of scraps. So there's quite a, you can fill that in after. As it is right there, that little yellow piece fell off of this heart. So I don't know why I'm doing this, but I started by trying to get that teeny little yellow piece to stick. And then I realized, no, that's just ridiculous, Nicole. Go ahead and just grab yourself a slightly larger piece. This one was torn, and I'm just going to add adhesive, lined up along the edge where I think it would look nice, and then I trimmed it off. So I kind of filled in. Otherwise, I would have had a large kind of blue section, and I wanted a little bit more color. So again, if you have a little bit of the white cardstock showing and you want to cover it up, or maybe you have too much of one paper and you want to just kind of cover it up to add a little bit more color, just grab one of your scraps, add some tape runner to the back of it, and then just stick it down and trim off around the edge of your template. And that's a great way to just finish off your hearts. So there's no wrong way to do that. There's no wrong way to cut these out either, but you can see each one of these hearts I'm cutting out now looks totally different. And I really love that. I love that they're not all the same. I love that they're going to be all totally different, but when you put them on the page together, it's all just going to flow really nicely. And it's a really great embellishment for your project, like really easy. This is definitely something I think I would be doing while sitting watching a movie, or even with my kids, like doing something with my daughter, having her help me stick all of this down, or having her do it and then me going in after and cutting these out. I mean, I can also see versus instead of a heart punch, you could create this collaged background and then go in with like a circle punch and punching these out, which would be a lot easier also. But that would be a fun embellishment for your page, or even an entire background with collaged circles. So a lot of different ways you could use this collage, and a great way to use and really stretch if you get a kit. So if you get a monthly subscription kit or a quarterly one, or even the SET sampler, if you get something like that, this is a great way to use little things like that, little extras, all those pretty pieces that you just can't part with. This is a great technique to use when you really want to make the most of those pieces. This would be really great with vintage book papers, or really pretty soft floral papers, maybe for a wedding page, punching it into flower shapes, like that would be beautiful. There's just a lot of ways that you can take this collage technique and incorporate it into different sorts of projects. So I actually think I've done more than 7 hearts here, but I think I'm just at this point nearing up how much paper I had collaged, and I just wanted to make the best use of it and cut it all out. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. You can do the same, which means you just have bonus to use on another project. And as you can see, I have one more little piece here, so why not make one more heart out of it? I'll put all my hard work to use, right? Why waste that? So I'm going to cut out one more heart, and then I'm going to take these hearts, and you can leave them the way they are, or you can take them to the next level like I'm going to do and add some additional texture to them. And we'll go through that in just a few minutes. But again, get all your hearts, get them all ready. And then once you're done with that, all of our scraps that we have left over, we are done with our scraps. So you can do whatever you wish with them. I know there's a lot of discussion that always happens about scraps, like how big of scraps do you keep? All those squares, I would keep all those squares. Those 2-inch squares, I would keep them. But I'll leave that up to you, what you want to do with all your extra. I highly recommend you keep it, because a little does go a long way. If you've learned nothing in this class, that would be one thing that I would hope you would learn at the end of this. But now what I'm going to take my hearts and I'm going to add some texture. Again, I whipped out my sewing machine. Just for me, it's a lot easier. It's fast. And to be honest, I feel like the sewing on the hearts kind of helps them stay together better. I think that's just in my head, but I really just love the texture of the stitching. If you don't want to sew with the sewing machine, you absolutely could skip this. It's totally not necessary. I just love the dimension that it kind of adds, the cheap texture. You could, again, similarly to the other times I've done sewing, you could add with a journaling marker. You could take your tracing wheel again and run that through an ink pad and add it to the hearts, or you could absolutely leave it the same. You don't need to add this whatsoever. You could hand stitch on these. That would actually look really, really cool, because that would add a nice thicker texture to these as well. And I would say, absolutely that will look beautiful. Again, I don't have this sort of patience for hand stitching. I don't know. It's just so easy for me to use a sewing machine. This sewing machine I use is dedicated just for scrapbooking. I don't actually sew on other things, but I'm just adding rows of sewing to the hearts, and really not in any sort of fancy way. I'm just adding, straight lines across. Some of them going horizontally, some of them I'm going vertically. So again, if you're going to use this with like a journaling pen, for example, I would maybe add my journaling, the dashes onto the areas like this one here where the orange is going across and there's a lot of orange. Just those dashes will help break up some of that and add a little bit more texture there. So if you're going to add stitching, that's how I would do it. I am adding multiple lines of stitching and not just one row. So you can see I'm kind of adding 2-3 rows of just straight stitching. You could do zigzag, you could leave it the way it is. You know, again, not totally necessary, but I just think it adds like a really nice texture, and you don't need a fancy sewing machine. You know, a nice, simple, basic stitch sewing machine is honestly a really good addition to a craft space. Again, I know a lot of people don't want to be bothered with a sewing machine, but it is one of my favorite tools that I use in a lot of my projects. So, but again, you don't need to sew. You can use any of the items that I've mentioned, or you can leave them just plain and they'll be absolutely perfect as well. All right, so now we have kind of our embellishments made. I'm going to grab my page again and I'm going to start by sticking down my photos. I am going to make a mistake here, and you're going to see I'm going to actually stick all my photos down with tape runner. Now, it's not really a mistake. You could absolutely do this. But like I said earlier, 90% of the time I stick my photos down with a foam adhesive. I just feel like I like the dimension. I actually like having the foam kind of inside under the photos. To me, it just makes the photos pop on my page. And it does give me that ability to tuck things under should I want to do that. So I just kind of like that versatility. I am adding quite a bit of tape runner to the back of my photos. And I am going to take these off later. So just so you know, I am going to use foam to stick these down. So if you're sticking your photos down now, use foam adhesive. If you don't want to and you want to use tape runner, that's okay. You can still do that. But I am going to have to lift up one of these photos later. And I just realized, you know, I'd rather have them down with foam. So I'm actually going to go in and do that. But first I will actually put foam along behind all of these hearts. So I'm going to take my foam and add foam to the back of all the hearts. And again, I really want to have almost like a chipboard looking embellishment when we're done with these. So I'm just adding like 3 or 4 or 5 dots of foam to the back of all of these. And that's going to help lift them off my page and just create like a natural dimension. You can see that there's a shadow. As soon as you put them down, there's a bit of a shadow on the page. And that's just, you know, if you lay them flat on the page, you don't kind of get that same texture. But look how fun those look, all collaged and pretty on the page. And I love how they're all so different. So I'm just kind of, as I foam them, I'm kind of putting them where I think they might look good. 2 of those hearts there, you can see have wider navy bands on them. So I know now I don't want to have those 2 probably close together, only because I don't want to have too much that looks the same. I really want to have a good variety. So I'm going to kind of go through and pick out from these hearts. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I have 9 of them actually. I'm going to choose the 7 I kind of like the most. And this is at the point where I realize, no, I want my pictures foamed. So I go back in and do that. But while you're going through your hearts, adding your foam to them, choose the 7 you like best. Or if you've made more than 7, if you have 7, perfect. Make sure you get foam on all of them. We are going to put a few of these hearts on the left side of the page, and the rest will be on the right side of the page. And we are going to kind of scatter them through. So make sure you don't have too many that are too similar together. Like, it's very unlikely that you have very many that are very close in how they look. I'm certain that they probably all look different. But again, I have 2 there that have a really distinctive navy band in them. And I love the navy because it draws that navy in from that floral paper that I have on the left side of the page. However, I don't want them together. So I just keep that in mind when you have your hearts getting ready to put them on the page, that you are going to do that. So I can see here that I've already ruined my background from ripping off my tape runnered photos. And I'm not worried because I'm going to cover that up again and the photos are going to the same place. So I'm not at all worried. We're not going to see that later. It's not going to be an issue. But again, adding the foam adhesive really kind of gives me the ability to tuck things under. Quite often I'll tuck florals or leaves or something like that underneath photos. And that just gives me the ability to do that. Sometimes I like to layer little strips of paper under a photo. And if I don't have those stuck down with foam adhesive, I kind of don't have the ability to do that. It kind of limits me a little bit. So I just kind of like having them popped. I feel like it gives them natural life and dimension. and it really does make them the star of your show. So that is really, again, what your project should really be about. Not necessarily all this fun stuff like we've been doing in class today, but you really want to have your photos be the star. So I think just adding that foam behind it helps that happen. And foam is a really good sticky way to stick things to your project. I don't think I've ever gone back to an older layout of mine, and I've been scrapbooking since 1999, so I have some old stuff, and I've never seen something that's fallen off with foam adhesive. I have had some, maybe lesser quality adhesives I used in the past, when I thought, it might be frugal and I could skimp on adhesive, and I've realized that some of that has dried up. I've never really had that happen with foam, so I think that's why I really stuck with foam, but I think I'm rambling about foam adhesive. Sorry, guys. Boy, oh boy. All right, so I am just lining these photos up. I'm adding 2 to the right side of the page, 4 to the left side of the page. I'm leaving about, it's probably a quarter to like an eighth to a quarter of an inch gap between them. And as you can see, I didn't mount these photos on white cardstock because when I printed them, it had that border around them already. So I kind of was able to cheat with that. But again, if you wanted to mount your photos on scraps of cardstock, you could do that. If you're able to print them like I did, bordered, it kind of helps cheat that way. You don't need to worry about it. But again, because we have so much color on this page, like even just the hearts alone, you can see how much color there is. It's really good to have your photos black and white in a certain situation like this, because then your photos are still a show. All the other stuff we're doing is not really distracting from the photos. Your photos are still going to shine. You're still going to be able to see all your lovely handiwork, but your photos are still going to be there. And it adds some symmetry to it because, as you take a lot of photos, some photos might have a lot of wacky colors in them. Some of them might be more natural. And this way it all just kind of melts together. My son there with his graduation outfit on, and the other 2, I can tell you, they did not color coordinate. So it was necessary to have that photo in black and white. And so I do a lot of black and white photos for a lot of my projects. Okay, so I'm just going to finish off my grid here. I'm happy now that I've got everything foamed. I'm going to play around now with where I want my hearts to be. If you have any areas that are sticking up, just stick those down. I am going to have, I think, 5 on this one side of the page and only 2 on the left. So I'm just trying to choose which ones I want. I think I'm going to stick this one here on the left side of the page. And I'm just going to have 2 kind of cascading over there. I want to have one kind of flowing over to the open area of my photo there on the left side of the page. And then I decided I didn't foam all my hearts because I had extra. So I decided I'm going to foam this one as well. And that's going to go here on my right side of the page. I'm just placing them right now. I'm not sticking them down. This gives me the opportunity to kind of move things around a little bit if I want to change where they are. We are going to add a little bit of ink behind this. So we are going to, do something else to the white cardstock. So don't stick these down just quite yet. Just kind of put them where you think you want to have them. And again, scattering them along that right corner. And I'm slightly overlapping them onto the background paper. That just adds a nice flow to your design. Sometimes if you stick too much, if your design is too graphic and you stick too much to that white cardstock area, for example, it's just not a natural flow when you look at the layout. So I'm going to stick down these hearts here on the left side of the page. And again, these are going to flow over onto my pattern paper. And I'm totally okay with that. This pattern paper that I chose for the background, you may look at it and think it's quite busy, but it's actually quite not. Like it's very soft. The watermark strokes on the paper are really great for a background pattern paper. Sometimes when you use pattern paper for a background, you got to be really careful with what you choose. You don't want it to be too busy sometimes. Otherwise, you have to add a lot of like white cardstock as an example to kind of balance it out. But I'm going to stick those 2 on the left. I'm going to leave those the way they are, but I'm going to do a little bit of extra here to the right side of the layout. So I have some distress ink. If you don't, I have scattered straws, the color I'm using. It's a nice soft yellow. If you don't have distress ink and you have oxides, you could use that. If you don't have distress ink or oxides, like I have here, you could use Vicki Boutin yellow art crayon and a stencil brush and brush that on. And I'm just really inking up my ink blending tool, and I'm not an expert at this. And I'm just lifting my heart where it is, and I really just want a very, very soft yellow how do I explain it? Cloud in behind of each of these hearts. So I'm really lightly dabbing the Distress ink. And the reason I'm using Distress ink is it's not quite as opaque as the Distress oxide. And I really, like I said, I just want that cloud in behind the hearts. I don't want a strong amount of color. So I'm just adding a very small amount behind the heart. And then I'm kind of placing it back to see, how I did. The one thing I don't want to do is have a big blob of the yellow. So if you've ever ink blended before, it's really easy, especially on textured cardstock, to kind of get a blob. You can even see it that I've done that there in a couple instances where it's a bit of more of a blob of color. I'm okay with that because that's where I'm going to cover up my heart. So I'm making sure that when I start my ink blending, I'm doing a really light-handed move and I'm starting in the middle of where the heart is and working outwards. And again, I just want a light dusting of color to make like a bit of a cloud-like effect in behind. So I'm really not adding a lot of ink, although you can see really there I had a real big blob of yellow. So I'm going to do one more heart here, and that's going to be along the top right edge of that photo. And so I'm really going to kind of start really where that corner of the photo is. So if I have my blob, as I do, that will kind of be covered up. And there's no right or wrong way to do this. I'm just adding this back there. If you at all don't want to do this, you don't need to. You could absolutely leave your background the way it is with the white cardstock and it's perfectly fine. I just kind of wanted to add a little bit more yellow just to detract a little bit from the pink. I wanted to bring a little bit of the yellow in because I have all those yellow pieces on the hearts. So I'm going to just stick my photo down because it kind of stuck up a little too much when I ripped it up. I'm going to start sticking my hearts down. So I'm going to start putting the hearts down where I have done that yellow ink background. And again, the Distress ink is a little bit more of a watercolory-like effect. It's a little softer. If you use oxide, it will be a little more opaque, so a little less watercolory looking. So be careful. If you're going to do a bit of a watercolor paint with this, be really careful that you don't add a lot of water. The kissing technique, if you ever heard of the kissing technique, would be the one that I would recommend. But again, stencil brush with art crayon from Vicki Boutin would be my first choice of alternative to the Distress ink if you don't have that. And again, you can completely leave it out. It's not necessary. But again, it just adds that nice softness to the background of the white cardstock so it's not quite so white. So I'm going to leave this here, and then I decided I really still wanted to add a little bit more extra to this background here. So I'm going to add some more ink, but more of the wet technique now versus this dry method with the ink blending tool. So I am going to go ahead and just get this last heart on here, and I'm going to pull out my acrylic sheet again and do a bit of a wet technique now with the exact same color of ink to get some of that on here. So you can see I have a whole hot mess of foam backings, but that's okay. So I'm going to go now and grab my acrylic sheet. And I'm going to use the Distress ink at first. And then I'm going to go back in again with the oxide. So I'm going to kind of use both of them, both using the same color, Scattered Straw. I have some water here and I'm using a wide round paintbrush. So it's a large round paintbrush. I'm just adding a tiny bit of water. And I'm just smushing my ink pad onto my acetate sheet here. This is just leftover from some packaging. And I have a leftover scrap of paper, as you can see, that I do this a lot with. And I'm just tapping my brush to add little tiny droplets onto my page. Very small scattering. I'm going to do the same thing on the left side of the page just to bring that yellow over onto that side of the project. You don't need to do a lot. Just a little bit will do. I am going to kind of clean this up so I don't have it all over my dining room table as I do. And I'm going to let that sit into the paper a little bit. Because there's not a lot of water, it's not going to warp. But I'm going to give it a minute and then I'm just going to take a paper towel like I have here and just dab it off. Now it looks like I've just dabbed everything away. I'll show you later on in the close-ups that it's still there, I promise. But the watercolor effect with the Distress ink is pretty faint. So I decided I wanted to go in with the oxides and you'll see the difference after. So this is the same color, Scattered Straw, and you can see the ink looks much different. So if you don't have either of these, you can kind of see the difference in the ink. And again, I'm going to add a little bit of water, just a couple tiny drops, and do the exact same thing. This time I'm just going to use my acetate sheet to protect my photos. And it's going to add the same droplets. The higher up you go from your page, the smaller your droplets are going to be. The lower down you go, the bigger your droplets are going to be. And again, I'm using a round, large brush. And I'm just dabbing that on. I am going to let that sit. You can see they are a little bit darker, and that's because the ink is a little more opaque. So that's kind of the difference between the different inks. So I'm going to let that sit just to soak in just a little bit. I am going to dab it away though, because I don't want it quite so drippy as it is. I really just want these drips to be subtle. So I'm just going to lightly tap now and tap those away. And again, just because of the sun and everything, you can kind of see them there on the right hand side of the page. They are there though. I'll show you in a close-up later. So now I think it's time to just finish this page off and get our title and some of our embellishments on. I'm not going to add a lot again to this page because I have a lot going on with the collaged hearts. They're pretty large. They're taking up a large amount of our page. We've already done that sort of embellishing. I am going to add a title. I think I'm going to put my title here starting right here at the bottom top right photo. I'm going to use these black thickers again because they have that nice black is a good rounding out and grounding for our page because of all the color. And what I love about these thickers that I don't think I've mentioned yet is that they have that like holographic iridescent line through the middle. And I really love that. It's super cool. So it's just kind of a nice texture. And to be honest, this is another one of those things that the theme of them, these are actually Halloween thickers, if you can believe it. Sometimes don't buy things just because they're the theme you think you're not going to use. So if you don't do a lot of Halloween projects, don't skip something like these past because they're super fun. And I love that there's a difference in font too. So the smaller T combined with the uppercase H is kind of cool. So we're going to add that. Again, you can use whatever title you want for your page. I'm going to call mine Love These Faces just for something fun. And I'm going to do that entire title here with the large thickers. So I'm going to just slightly overlap one part there onto my heart just because the E kind of needed to do that. But I'm just working with the open space from the hearts to figure out where I'm going to fill in my title. Now I thought about switching to the small, thicker, these foam stickers. I'm trying to think of a way I could incorporate some of those words in here, but I decided to just continue going on with my black thickers here. So I'm going to continue with the Love These Faces. I am going to use these foam stickers though. Instead of being part of my title on the page, I'll do a bit of a sentiment on the page. And so I'll do that more on the left side to kind of fill in that upper left area. So I'm going to take my paper piercer and try to get into these foam stickers here, and decided that I think I like the word memories. I think that kind of goes along with the photos I have on my page here. So I'm going to start with this on the left side, the top rightmost photo on the left side. And I'm not using a ruler. I'm just going to kind of stick those down. If you're really worried that you're not going to make it straight, I would recommend that you stick these letters along the edge of a ruler. So that part of it overlaps over the top or the bottom, and then you can stick it down. So that would be my tip to get these to be straight. If you feel like, I think I did a pretty decent job, maybe it's slightly crooked, but I am okay with it. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to use an ampersand, and then I decided to use love just to bring some of the pink in on this side. Just to tie everything together, that I have a mixture of different colors in that subtitle so that it's not like all very stark. But I like the blue over there. It kind of helps bring a little bit more blue into the project as well. So now I'm thinking, okay, I really haven't used a lot of these floral embellishments at all. In fact, I don't think I've touched them one bit. I'm going to go through my embellishment pack again, and I like sorting out by the items that are in there, usually on my desk. And I thought, oh, there's 3 of these photo tabs. That's perfect because I have 3 kids. I'll highlight each of the 3 photos with one of these photo tabs. So I use my mini stapler just to add a little staple to the top of each, just to add a little detail. And I'll take a glue dot now, and I'll just kind of stick one of each of these photo tabs onto each of the singular photos of my kids. And just one for each, just a glue dot where that staple is. And then I'll just stick them down into the open area, whichever one. I'm going to use the green one up here because I don't want to use the purple, because I thought the purple one matched a little too closely with that memories word, and it would have been too much of that color in one area. So now that I have that, I'm going to now kind of play around with my title a bit. I do cut this journaling card down. I wanted this kind of quatrefoil strip, and I had intended on using it here underneath this title. And now I don't know if you've noticed in the single page when I showed the close-ups, but I actually take this off the page any second now, and I actually decided to use that along the left-hand strip of the photo, on the left photo on the single page. So take a look at your instructions and you'll see that I will take that off any second now, and that is, I put it along the photo there. So I decided, here it is, I'm going to take that off. I liked this red tag instead. I know there's a lot of pink going on this page. Normally you wouldn't mix pink and red together, but the color of this red is almost pink-like, so it goes really well. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to stick that underneath here. I think that looks a lot nicer. It fills in the area more. And then, yeah, I used that little scallopy strip on the single page after the fact. So sorry guys, I probably cheated a little there, but I did add a photo tab to one of my photos there. And now I decided I really need to use these floral embellishments. Like, we haven't even touched them. And I thought there's still a lot of open area in this page. And what I don't like is when there's open gaps like this. Around these hearts, there's a lot of open gaps. And the flowers are just a really great way to fill in that. So I'm going to start with some of the larger flowers in this package, just the singular kind of flower pieces. And I'm going to add foam behind those. And then I'm going to add glue dots behind some of these smaller leafy sprigs, I'm going to call them. And I'm going to take the foam and put it behind the flowers. And that's what I'm going to use to start off filling in these open areas. And the idea here is that the leaves and the flowers are going to kind of fill in those gaps around the hearts and really just overlap the hearts slightly. And that's going to kind of make that all kind of flow together quite nicely. So I'm going to start with the larger flowers, because typically when you embellish, you would start with a larger piece and work your way down to the smaller ones. So that is exactly what we're going to do here with the flowers. So I'm going to grab a few. I'm actually just sorting here, you know, some of the flower pieces separately, the leaves kind of separately, just so it's easier for me to grab when I kind of want to get everything down on the page. I'm going to grab an assortment of different flowers and stick a foam adhesive to the back of them. I'm going to use this foam adhesive, and then I have another one on a sheet that is thinner and easier just for some of those really tiny flower pieces. So not only do I love foam adhesive, but I have several varieties and sizes, because, you know, if you're weird like me, that's just what you do. Okay, so now I'm going to rip off the backing of this foam adhesive, and I'm going to start over on the left here. I'm just going to tuck one here. Sorry, it's a little hard to see on that side, but I'll show you in the close-ups. And then once you get your kind of flower on, and you'll see this in a second on the right-hand side of the page, you're going to tuck in a sprig just to kind of fill in that gap. And you're almost going to make one of those clusters around each of the flowers. So I'm going to show you this one here a little bit better on the right side of the page. And it's going to really, again, you start with the larger flower. So I'm going to use this one here. This one is the blue, and I kind of liked the blue here that was in that heart, and that just kind of carries that blue in, that lighter blue a little bit in. And then I wanted to add a sprig in, so I'm going to start with the large flower, and then I'm just going to tuck in a sprig that has a glue dot behind it to fill in the gap. Now, you really want to, have to be super careful, but you really want to change up the colors that you're using. You don't want to have a large cluster of one thing unless you're going with a monochromatic like heart theme. I would say you really want to make sure you bring in different colors throughout so that you're spreading the color around. Because in a way, we're creating a bit of a rainbow type effect on this layout. I really just wanted to fill in above the word love there, so I added that pink sprig. That's probably all I'm going to do to that heart. That's probably the largest piece. I'm going to add little ones over here. But again, I'm going to add kind of one flower and one sprig almost to each heart. And in fact, this one here, I've started by adding just a small heart on the top, and then I tuck a little bit larger one underneath. And it's really just making a bit of a cluster and sticking it in underneath to fill in the gaps. This one here with above the word love is bothering me a little bit. I feel like it needs a little bit extra something there. So I will go in later and add a smaller sprig. And I'll show you a close-up of each of them later on in the video, of course, so that you can see a little bit better in case you're not able to right now. But again, I'm just going to add in the smaller pieces after, and I feel like adding that flower there kind of filled in a bit of a gap you could see from the sprig. So you're really just making little clusters, and you can see how it's all kind of starting to blend together nicely. You're filling in that open area, but it's not overwhelming. You're still leaving that yellow, pretty cloudy background to pop through. You're still letting your collage is still very front and center, and just adding in little tiny bits. And that's why glue dots are good, because you just need to add the glue to the bottom of those sprigs. And then the rest of it is almost like free falling. And so it will still stay where it needs to stay, but the whole thing doesn't need to be stuck to a board, like it's nailed in place. So I have some thinner foam adhesive, like I said. I'm going to use that to stick some of these smaller little flowers down. It's good because you can really trim it down to a small skinny piece, and it's really easy to make these pop. So I'm going to do that with some of these flowers here, and I'm just bringing some more yellow over to this left side of the page. And then I'm going to do just the last few flowers up here on the right side, and we're almost done with everything. So I didn't really use a lot of the sprigs that had leaves already attached. I like kind of building my own clusters, I guess you could say. But I mean, if you wanted to cheat a little, you absolutely could use some of those ones, like the pink one you can see in the bottom right corner that already has some leaves attached. You could do that. I just feel like adding these little pieces separately kind of gives you the ability to tuck it behind a photo like I just did there, or add it into a little kind of open space. It can overlap your heart a little bit more than using the ones the way they are already printed. And now I've decided, I think I'm pretty happy with my hearts and my florals, so I'm just going to very lightly tap some blank ink. I use Glimmer Glaze from Tattered Angels for mine, but if you don't have something like this, it's like a really thick nail polish like texture. You could absolutely like watered down black soot distress ink or distress oxide. You could use Heidi Swap, has the black color shine. Any sort of black watercolor paint thinned out just ever so slightly. I wouldn't add a lot of water to it, but that's what I use. So let's take a quick peek. Like, look at that collage amazingness. I love how those hearts look. I know I'm doing this again. I hope you guys like this one. I hope you'll do this again too. It's so much fun today in class with you guys. I hope you've enjoyed the technique that you've learned. I hope you've enjoyed this class. I've loved spending the last 2 hours with you. I would love for you to connect with me on social media. You can find me on Instagram or on Facebook, and you can check out my cut files as well. I create cut files every month for the magazine, and I hope you'll check that out. I will see you again soon. See you in Facebook group chat. Bye-bye.